Welcome back to Film It Friday. If you're new here, my name's Chris. I'm a videographer, photographer, and YouTuber. I make videos every single week about video and photography related reviews, tips, and tricks. So if you like that kind of thing, why not hit the subscribe button? Although this week we're not doing that. This week we're looking at part 2 of building my dream man shed. So if you haven't seen part 1, there's a link in the video description. Go ahead and check that out. It's a really good watch. This one's slightly different. I time-lapsed the whole build from beginning to end, and as you can probably tell, I'm standing in what will be my dream man shed. And I just want to say a couple of thank yous before we get started. Firstly, to my mum and dad for coming and helping on the last 2 days of the build. And secondly, to Andrew and Joyce, Rachel's parents, for helping us make this dream become a reality. Andrew put in so much work bringing down the shed and putting it back up. I cannot thank you enough. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And lastly, but by no means least, is my amazing wife, Rachel, for putting up with this crazy harebrained scheme. It's caused so much stress and you support me through everything I do. So thank you very much. Let's get into the video. So this is part 2 of building my dream man shed, and it comprises of 5 days worth of time-lapse footage, all stitched together into a 25-minute video, I think. I'm just going to talk you through some of the bits that I think are important, and for the rest of it I'm just going to leave you to enjoy the time-lapse. So here is a really important section. We remeasured the base of the shed to make sure that what we'd laid out on the ground in the garden was actually going to fit. And this is where one of the first mistakes was made. We thought that every single section of the base was exactly the same, but it turns out the middle section was slightly narrower than the 2 outer sections, and it did cause us a bit of a headache, but it didn't stop the build and we managed to overcome it eventually. So once we were happy with the measurements, we did a 3-4-5 triangle to make sure that our square was actually square, and we put tiles to mark out where we wanted the corners to be, and we also spray painted around the edge of the plot so we knew how much we had to dig. Then Andrew brought the digger down and we commenced digging. We broke ground on the ultimate man shed. I'm really glad we did hire a digger for this. If we'd have had to do this by hand, I think it probably would have taken us a week just to do this section. It was absolutely back-breaking when I did have to do it by hand. So about 9 o'clock our delivery arrived that had everything, well, we thought it had everything we needed to actually complete the shed. It was missing a few things. We did get a load of sand, a load of sharp sand, cement, a few pieces of timber and some extra floorboards because we knew some of the floorboards that we brought back were rotten. And we did try and reuse everything that we'd taken down from the shed from where it was. We did add some extra insulation, and just a few extra pieces of timber, not too much at all for this section of the build, and obviously a hell of a load of screws. As you might have noticed, I'm now driving the digger. This was probably the highlight of my week, driving that digger. I'm into diggers, and it was really good fun learning how to use it and actually operating it and building the foundations of my own shed with it. It's great. So after a quick bucket change, we were ready to start the holes which were going to hold the cement for our foundations. We did 8 holes around the base of the shed and then we filled them with concrete. This will provide a really solid foundation, which means the shed will be rock solid and it's never going to move. If the people move in after us want to remove it, they're going to have a really fun time doing it. It was really handy having the digger to get the sand from our driveway. When the delivery was dropped off, they said they could only do one drop-off point and it had to be at the end, which was a bit annoying because we had a ton of ballast delivered up there and we actually wanted it around the front of the house, but not to worry. So at this point we're just double checking the level and we're double checking the distance of everything, making sure it's all spot on before we finally cement the tiles in place on the top, because the feet of the shed are going to be sitting on these tiles. So there were a couple of different ways that we could have done the foundations. We did talk about having a big layer of concrete, and somebody else suggested maybe railway sleepers because they're not going to move, they're big, they're heavy, they're going to be there forever. But it did just come down to cost in the end. So we had a load of bricks left over from taking our chimney down in our house. We had some slabs left over from the garden that we didn't really want. So it only cost us a few bags of cement and some sand. So then we moved on to actually taking a look at the base. This is the first time we'd had it out since it went into storage, and I was getting excited because as soon as the base is out and the base is there, there's going to be a shed not very long afterwards. And this is the first time we actually got to take a look at the underside of the base. We hadn't even looked at it when we took it up from the garden that we took it out of. When we flipped the base over, we realized the plywood that was attached was really thin, it was old, there were rotten bits, and Andrew suggested that we replace all the plywood with brand new plywood. And the very next morning he got up about 5:30 and he drove all the way to Swindon to go to B&Q. He strapped a load of massive pieces of plywood on his roof and he came back, and he was back nearly before I was even awake. So thank you for that, Andrew. So my first job the next morning was to creosote the edges of all the bases ready to go in. Obviously we want this shed to last a long time. It lasted 20 years in the last place and it's still got a lot of life left in it, but we decided to creosote all of the edges, and we did creosote the tops as well once we had put the new plywood in place. This should ensure that it's going to have a really good life and it's not going to rot very easily. So once the plywood is in place and creosoted, we also covered it in this fabric, which will again protect it from the elements, protect it from the moisture, and stop it rotting. 1 down and 3 to go. We did all 3 exactly the same way. So this is the end of day 2 and we finally had a piece of the shed in place and we were both ecstatic. We did actually manage to get 2 pieces in place by the end of the day and I couldn't have been happier. We were right on track for getting the whole shed up by the end of the week, which I thought was going to be an impossible task. Like I said earlier, some of the timbers around the outside were rotten, so we had to rip them off and replace them with brand new ones, but it didn't actually take as long as I thought it was going to, and it looked really good when we were finished. This was about the point that we realised that the centre piece of base was slightly narrower than the other 2. And it did give us a bit of a headache, like I said, but it didn't actually cause us any problems. We were just a bit confused, but we sorted it out and it all fit really well. So the next day my dad offered to help us. He drove down an hour and a half in the morning, got with us for 8:30 and was an absolute trooper, so thank you, Dad. And also Rachel had the day off work, so we had 4 people instead of 2 people. We really kicked it up a gear and we got a lot done. So we're just finishing off the final piece of base section and then we're going to lift it into place. So once we had all 3 base sections in place, it was time to start work on the floorboards. So I filled all of the gaps in between the joists with the same fiberglass that we took out of them originally. I added a little bit more in there just to give it that extra bit of warmth in the winter. And Andrew and my dad started work figuring out which piece of floor went where. Now, when it was with its previous owners, they did have a few leaks and some of the floorboards got ruined. They were a bit mouldy, so we decided to throw them away, buy new ones and start afresh. With some of them, we did reuse about 70% of the boards that came out of there, and this did cause us a couple of issues matching the boards up, but my dad and Andrew really nailed it and we got there in the end. It was really satisfying watching this floor be laid because this has been my pipe dream for the past 5 years, I think, and now I've finally got a space to call my own. And this floor was like the beginning of the end for me. I could see where this was going to go and how it was going to look, so I was really excited. And there we have it, one finished base. Time for the walls. With the wall sections we did have a little bit of trouble because some of them weren't labelled when they went onto the lorry. Thank God I had Andrew and my dad working it out, measuring and figuring out exactly where every single piece had to go. Without them I would have been totally lost. Once we had the first couple of pieces up, we knew exactly what we were doing, and it didn't take long at all to get those walls up. So for anyone that's interested, I think we are into this shed for about £1,000, which is unbelievably good. When we looked at having one built, we were looking at a cost of around £6,000 to £7,000, and it wouldn't have been anywhere near this quality. So although this has been a lot of effort, a lot of work, I think it's definitely been worth it, and we've got a really solid structure at the end of it. Instead of having something that might only last 10 years, this should last 20, 30 years, hopefully. The whole shed is fully insulated, so insulation in the floor, the walls and the roof, so it should be fairly warm in the winter, and it's boiling hot at the moment and it's quite cool in there, so I was really worried about that, but I'm not anymore. So in this shot we're just refilling all of the roof panels with brand new insulation, again so we don't lose any heat in the winter, and I think that was a really smart move. It didn't cost us too much either, probably around £150 to do the whole thing, so definitely worth it, and it should keep my feet and my head warm in those colder months. So we're on to the A-frame time. This again posed a couple of different problems because I'd spun the shed round for a couple of reasons. One, I had a window that was going to be facing a fence, so we span that round so I could look at the house. And the other one is it's got a built-in skylight at the top, and that was going to be facing an alleyway, which there's usually lots of noisy kids down there and I didn't want them interfering in my work, so we faced that the other direction. And then this A-frame wasn't very happy. The shed did go back together quite easily, but there were a few problems along the way because of this spinning around. Everything was a bit backwards, but it all did go back up eventually, and as you can see we're putting the very first piece of roof panel on. I forgot to say my mum is also here helping on the Friday, so thank you mum. Once we knew what we were doing, the roof pieces absolutely flew up, and it took us about 2 hours from start to finish to get the first piece up to the last piece. It was great. And there we go, that's the very last piece of roof section going on, so we now have a fully formed shed. The next day we did actually put all the windows in and some of the trim as well, and we did put a tarp over the top. None of that was filmed, but it was a bit boring, so I left it out. I really hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it was informative to you if you're thinking about doing the same thing. I am just going to give you a quick tour of exactly where we've got to now, because part 3 is probably going to be quite a few months down the road. I'm going to do all of the interior, I'm going to paint the outside, we're going to put the roof on, so it's going to be quite a long time until we get all that done. So let's have a look at what it looks like now. So this is just a quick look at the inside. Obviously the roof needs finishing. We need to put in that skylight. We've got quite a lot of timber over here. This is the skirting board, which might be going up or it might not be. All of these hundreds of pieces of wood over here are the cladding for the roof, which also need going up. And as you can see, I have started doing the walls. We're going to be using the decking that we managed to salvage from where we picked the shed up from. And we're going to have decking all the way up the walls, which will give us quite a lot of flexibility, an extra layer of insulation, and it's going to be really, really solid. And on the outside, we've just got this tarpaulin, obviously one of the windows that we put in, and the other window, so we're a bit further ahead than the end of that video, but not too much. We've also started putting on these big rails down the side, which weigh an absolute ton. So I hope you really enjoyed that video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Film It Friday, and you'll also not miss part 3 of building the dream man shed. Thanks again, and I will see you again next time.